Hello. Long time no chat. I just got one thing to say. Did you know that there are no term limits for any judges, county district attorneys, and city attorneys, as well as several other elected positions like mayor or even city council members? Sorry to anyone who already knew that. Chances are you didn't know that for anything good. And to those that didn't know, stay tuned. I'm going to briefly go over what I've learned and researched and share it with you in as concise of a way as I could. Let's start by going over the current laws. Article 6, Section 7 of the Minnesota Constitution, right here, term of office, election, sets the term length of all judges to 6 years and until their successor qualifies. Please note that they can either be elected by like an attorney running to an incumbent or appointed by the governor, in which then they have to run for election. Section 10 down here for retired judges details how a retired judge may be able to be assigned cases from their assigned jurisdiction. I just find that a little peculiar. If we go on to Minnesota Statute 388.01, you're going to see that it's much of the same for county/district attorneys who also have a 4-year term length and until a successor qualifies. Please note, I found no language at a state level regulating anything for city attorneys, but from what I've researched, it is pretty standard for a city council to be in charge of hiring and working out the contracts with city attorneys. So I guess for now, hit up your city councilman or woman or person. Minnesota Statutes Chapter 375.01, right up here, details a 4-year long term and until a successor qualifies for county commissioners. Statute 205.07 shows that a mayor's term is either 2 or 4 years, and that the city council members are at a 4-year term length. Have you noticed yet the one thing they all have in common? They have no maximum limit for the amount of terms that someone can serve, consecutively or non-consecutively. I find that to be a little bit of an issue, and I think every warm-blooded citizen in this country, in this state, would agree that that is kind of disturbing. I understand that the language is probably written with the intent of helping out smaller communities that might not have attorneys who are wanting to run for these positions, or even just regular citizens. But for the majority of these, outside of maybe a few positions, I don't see that really realistically being that much of an issue. But that's just my uneducated opinion, based off of my first-hand experience, which spans several years. Let's go over some hypothetical situations that can arise due to there being no term limits, aka essentially endless power. I'll then follow up with potential solutions for each situation. To start, did you know that some cities hire their city attorneys from the same city that they have their private practice located and or personally live in. Now you might be thinking, why is that an issue? Well, I think it goes without saying that if a city attorney's private practice is within the same jurisdiction of the city that they work for, that there might be intentional or unintentional preferential treatment given to that attorney's private practice clientele. In fact, I would go as far as to stress that I've personally witnessed this type of preferential treatment occur between city attorneys and their private practice clientele. Carrying on, we also just need to stop having retired judges. The phrase itself makes zero sense. You shouldn't be working if you're quote unquote retired. Get off the bench and go spend time with your beautiful grandkids. Just get out of here. I appreciate your service. Okay, thanks, bye. On to the next judge. There are many instances in my life where I've seen a literal dinosaur trying to make rulings in cases involving the internet or social media, and these geriatric judges who never even could have imagined the world with the internet when they were my age are now supposed to make judgments involving the internet and social media? That literally makes no sense. You don't have any familiarity with the things that you're being entrusted by the populace to make sound and unbiased and objective rulings on. Have you also ever realized how it's almost always the same people getting reelected over and over for all of these positions, whether it's the court positions as a judicial officer down to even like the mayor or county board or city council? And sometimes these people, many times, they're in those positions for multiple terms, unopposed, maybe over a decade in this elected position. Like, geez, if you can't complete your goals within like 1 or 2 terms, maybe move over and let someone else with fresh new ideas give it a shot. I don't know. I feel like at its core, it's one's ego that would keep you rerunning over and over and over, or at least not passing the torch to someone else who you deem capable and fit for the position. I just find it to be a horrible byproduct of our current system that there are so many positions that go unopposed every election cycle. In fact, people are afraid to run against incumbents who are attorneys due to fear of retaliation. I've read several articles that detail how attorneys are afraid to run against an incumbent judge because if they see that judge in their day-to-day practices and lose running against them to unseat them, they fear facing retaliation in the courtroom, aka their daily lives that supports their livelihood. And I think that's a very valid concern. We really need to make it safer for these people to run so we can encourage brighter minds to run. That way we don't always attract people who just want the power and influence. And then one of my final points is really just the compassion fatigue. Whether you're a firefighter or a therapy hotline worker or an officer or a judicial officer or mayor or council member, whatever, chances are you're going to run into compassion fatigue. That's the term. Look it up. And you can end up with different things all related to secondary traumatic stress, STS, a very valid concern. And there are even several other concerns that I go into later. This happens to almost anyone in these positions. And that's kind of one of the other larger points of this video, is to have more compassion with these positions and letting people take care of themselves and their mental health, lest they end up becoming so desensitized and depressed, whatever, and start showing less compassion to their constituents and the people that might come in front of them as clients or people seeking judgment for their legal issues. That can very much have profound impacts on people's lives. Maybe a judge gets triggered by a certain case and almost too harshly reacts. Maybe the judge has an unknown bias and supports one party over the other without giving them both their rightful time in the courtroom. There are so many issues that come from this. Maybe a city council member gets so desensitized that they don't want to go out and mingle with their community anymore. Maybe a county board commissioner is so afraid of being in public that they just start seeing their community as a bunch of villains. I mean, the implications and situations I could talk about are just endless. I feel like all of these issues could be solved very easily. I'd start by forcing all of these positions and the people running for them to be forcefully retired at the age of 65, standard retirement age. Obviously, if you're already 65, you're too old to run, you're too old for office. Then let's make the term lengths for every position just a solid 4 years and have a term limit of 2 terms, 8 years total. Doesn't need to be consecutive or not. I don't care about the consecutiveness. Overall, this way, no one is in a position of power or influence for a full decade. The world is changing faster than it ever has been, and we need to keep fresh minds in these positions. A generation used to be notated, I think, by every 10 years, and people are saying now there's half generations every 5 years because of how much everything changes every 5 years now. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be paraphrasing that incorrectly, but I think the general thought and sentiment of that phrase is still very true. Things are changing all too fast. And I think next, we should encourage more people to run for these positions by making sure they can get a thriving wage once they're in office. Higher wages are shown to attract more applicants. That way we don't have applicants who are solely running just to benefit from the power and influence from the position. I've looked into city attorneys' wages, and they're $20,000 to $30,000 a year. That leads me to believe that the only attorney who would want that position is an attorney who would more benefit from the power and influence that position comes from, because that amount of added wage really is nothing to a successful attorney who's probably making 6 figures, right? Obviously, we then have to go on to protect the people who lose in their elections from retaliation. I'd say we do this by deeming people in the elections that lose and whoever wins that relationship as a conflict of interest. I don't even think that matters. Maybe a city attorney's showing preferential treatment to someone that they ran against, or non-preferential treatment to someone that one of their clients doesn't like. We need to strengthen these conflict of interest laws as a whole, especially for people who run. That way, attorneys who want to run an unseated judge don't have to worry about that judge messing with their day-to-day lives that then impacts their ability to pay for their bills and support their livelihood. All of this, I believe, will reduce these elected officials' level of stress and reduce the judicial officers' level of compassion fatigue. And in fact, the compassion fatigue levels for everyone, so hopefully it stays in a level of compassion satisfaction. Anyways, that about wraps up everything I have to say. Let's just go over some of the other slides here. So you have more of an understanding of my sources, which will be linked in the video description. This article is Judges and Stress and goes over the model of judicial stress, which shows three main categories that add to the stress, which affects the personal effects and have also job effects, which, it's worth the pause and the read. And then went over this article by the Missouri Bar, Judges and Compassion Fatigue, what it is and what to do about it. And it highlighted this part here: judges facing burnout often feel drained, as if they have nothing left to give, and feel a lack of achievement, purpose, and sense of hope. This video isn't meant to be insulting or offensive or aggressive or intimidating in any way. This sentence is pretty much the backbone of why I made this video. I think a lot of people forget how hard the job is to be an attorney, to be a judge, to be a mayor, to be a city council member, a county commissioner, a police officer, a firefighter, a therapy hotline worker / crisis center worker, whatever, you name it. These jobs require an insane amount of empathy, an insane level of skill to be able to separate your work from your personal life, so on, so forth. There's signs of compassion fatigues here that go into all those career paths. And I think at the end of the day, we got to really read the scholarly literature here and look into the numbers and look into how we can enable all of these career paths to better use the tools to respond and, keep themselves safe, which is truly why, once again, I focused on all of this and believe term limits are kind of the universal answer here, not just for our state, but every state. I found even some articles on police compassion fatigue that I'll link in the description as well. I genuinely think all of this is of the utmost importance. And this recent article, even from the other day, about what Minnesotans should know about judicial races, mentions that people really aren't the most educated when they come to knowing who to vote for. People sometimes just vote for the other party that's the non-incumbent for no reason. And this article details how in a lot of ways sometimes the judicial challenger is potentially very underqualified compared to someone who might be an appointee by the governor or what have you. And because of all of these reasons I've mentioned before from the very get-go, if you read these laws and statutes, you'll find that a lot of these judges don't have any incentive to publicly talking about their beliefs, their motivations, their career paths, their education / academic background. None of that. If I did the same job for 10 years, I think it goes without saying that my motivations at the beginning of the job could be completely different than what they are in the present day 10 years later. And it would be reasonable and understandable for people to have a completely different perspective on that job, which in this instance could unfortunately mean being very desensitized and withdrawn and antisocial, whatever, just all about that compassion fatigue. So I really think term limits are the answer. I would encourage everyone to go out right to all of these positions of power: the Supreme Court of Minnesota, the appellate court, the district courts, your mayor, your city council, your county commissioner board, the whole 9 yards. Even try to write to your city attorney if your city isn't a piece of shit that tries to hide all of their information. Go out, educate yourselves, come back here and tell me what you find. And if you already have some opinion, let me know what it is. I'm genuinely really curious and what everyone thinks about term limits. I know there are some genuinely good reasons that we don't have them, but I think in the modern day, we've long outlived the lack of language clarifying there to be term limits. I found nothing that explicitly suggests them or infers them. Like, there's no implication that we would have ever even have needed them or wanted them, which makes me very sad. Absolute power almost always leads to absolute corruption. So we need to do better by everyone. I genuinely think this is a non-partisan, apolitical issue. I think this would lead to society being better overall and also lead to better health and well-beings of all of the people in these positions of power. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. I hope this has been educational. The links will be in the video description. I look forward to hearing more of everyone's opinions in the comments below. Goodbye. Peace.